Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strode with certainty into the monumental Kennedy caucus room. She possessed absolute confidence in her impending televised triumph over Senator Ted Cruz. She remained entirely unaware, however, that the unassuming manila folder resting calmly beneath his hands held 5 inescapable pieces of evidence poised to permanently ruin her political career. This narrative fundamentally arises from the underlying structure of contemporary political showmanship. Routinely commanding the floor first, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez consistently seized the upper hand. 6 prominent years traversing the perilous marble corridors of the United States Capitol had taught her a crucial lesson that whoever dictates the initial boundaries of a public debate inevitably conquers the broader discussion. Shaping the public discourse was an exceptional expert talent she managed more confidently and performed more perfectly than almost any other figure in modern American governance. She leaned forward with aggressive self-reliance into her microphone, surrounded by the cavernous, resonant expanse of the famous Kennedy caucus room. The location was an awe-inspiring, historically rich space, characterized by colossal marble pillars and tremendously heavy, ornate crystal light fixtures. This was the precise, iconic setting where the fraught Watergate hearings had resonated across history. It was the exact chamber where the astonishing Iran-Contra disclosures were meticulously drawn out under the threat of lying under oath. It served as the spectacular arena for almost every significant congressional probe of the last 50 years that had played out beneath the harsh glare of broadcast lenses. On this particular afternoon, the space was stuffed to its absolute maximum limit. Every single open chair in the spectator gallery was wholly taken by quiet onlookers. The designated media area was instantly diminished to a standing-only zone crammed with seasoned professionals from 4 competing broadcast networks who were perspiring and urgently maneuvering their cumbersome gear to capture the absolute best, flattering, or destructive angles. Situated precisely 6 feet opposite her at the gleaming mahogany desk sat Texas Senator Ted Cruz. He remained entirely and unsettlingly still, his hands neatly and firmly clasped atop a simple, completely ordinary manila folder. He sported a faint, scarcely noticeable look that the New York representative had never previously seen from him at such an astonishingly brief personal range. It was the tranquil, utterly collected, boundlessly patient smirk of an experienced, battle-hardened lawyer who holds absolute, unshakable faith in the tangible proof resting silently right before him. She intentionally opted to wholly ignore his serene disposition, utterly brushing off the document holder, and swiftly initiated her meticulously orchestrated assault. Fixing her gaze straight upon him, she leaned nearer to the audio gear. She commenced her address by audaciously asserting that she and the right-wing Texan legislator ultimately held one distinct core point of consensus. The fiscal and political infrastructure of America is unquestionably and ruinously fractured. However, she pointed out with a biting, rehearsed tone, they possessed a profound and fundamental disagreement regarding precisely who was to blame for shattering it. Her booming voice effortlessly and perfectly transitioned into the heavily rehearsed, deliberately honed rhythm that her massive internet audience immediately identified as the thrilling, widely distributable prelude to a monumental political attack. She fervently and methodically outlined his long political background and monetary sponsorships. She declared for the official transcript that he had gladly taken tens of millions of dollars from massive contaminating fossil fuel entities across his lengthy, deeply rooted time in politics. She loudly brought up to the enthralled, quiet crowd his notorious, intensely condemned family vacation to the sunny shores of Cancun, while his very own voters in Texas endured horrific circumstances, perishing from the cold inside their residences during a catastrophic, unmatched winter blizzard. She aggressively charged him with persistently opposing every single legislative push and regulatory adjustment designed to permanently eradicate the poisonous impact of anonymous hidden funds from the U.S. electoral system. And presently, she announced with flair, averting her piercing stare completely from him and aiming it directly at the flashing red indicators of the broadcast lenses, he sat precisely there, opposite her at this identical desk, and had the absolute nerve to assert that the existing corrupted regulations are perfectly fine. The broadcast lenses, as she profoundly grasped, were consistently the actual targeted demographic. She comprehended this particular media dynamic much more acutely than any other seasoned lawmaker within the whole Capitol building. This highly awaited meeting was a combined House and Senate committee deliberately assembled to argue the fiercely disputed topic of extensive campaign finance restructuring. It represented her own enterprise, serving as her primary legislative cornerstone. It functioned as the exact philosophical bedrock upon which she had carefully constructed her explosive, unparalleled ascent to nationwide political fame. She had committed her entire congressional tenure to fervently contending that massive corporate wealth was a lethal, paralyzing toxin actively dismantling the democratic process. She performed a flawless, deeply emotive rhetorical shift, fervently asserting that the regulations only appear slightly tolerable to Senator Cruz because the entire political, judicial, and fiscal apparatus was intentionally constructed from its inception to lawfully shield and financially secure people of his precise advantage status. She labeled him flawlessly as a direct result of elite establishments. She depicted him as a man who effortlessly went to Princeton and Harvard, a person whose whole professional and political existence had been easily funded, backed, and maintained by the very same massive, anonymous corporate entities that actively corrupt authentic working-class representation. Then, her voice lowered exquisitely, utilizing an expert, profoundly calculated transition into a vocal register of relatable human vulnerability. This was the exact vocal modulation her backers affectionately termed speaking genuine truth. She prompted the utterly hushed committee room to remember her own exceptionally modest origins. She talked fervently and poignantly regarding growing up in a blue-collar, industrious household that could never even start to fathom affording the everyday indulgences that her wealthy rival casually anticipated every single day. She raised her well-known, highly publicized history as a working-class bartender in New York City. She vividly detailed the agonizing, draining reality of remaining on her feet for hours, meticulously tallying tiny, wrinkled, alcohol-soaked tips at the harsh conclusion of a physically exhausting shift, perpetually agonizing with a burdened, anxious mind if those meager bucks would actually be enough to cover the late-night subway fare to get her securely back home. She painted an exceptionally vivid, relatable picture of dispensing pricey, premium beverages for affluent, haughty Wall Street patrons who generated considerably more spare cash in a single, relaxed hour than she accumulated in a whole, punishing week of severe labor. Adjusting her stance perfectly to project absolute, uncompromising authority, she resolutely demanded that the senator utterly spare her any hypocritical, insincere lectures concerning the rigorous enforcement of political rules. She contended, with lofty phrasing, that enforcement is completely and utterly meaningless when the purported regulators themselves are wholly funded, possessed, and guided by the exact wealthy individuals who are actively breaking the rules. The cavernous room reacted exactly and precisely as everyone predicted. The liberal side of the public gallery instantly erupted into passionate, supportive applause. The conservative side maintained a tense, polite silence, while the numerous television lenses perfectly captured the gripping, undeniable image of a brave, young political fighter fearlessly speaking truth directly to entrenched institutional power. She knew flawlessly how to completely fill a television frame, and she had just delivered a masterclass. During the whole of this dramatic, deeply poignant exhibition, Ted Cruz did not wince, he did not sigh heavily, and he did not divert his eyes. His hands remained firmly and permanently resting on the plain manila envelope. When the committee chairman finally banged his gavel, quieted the echoing room, and officially gave the senator the floor for his designated opening statement, Cruz leaned forward incredibly slowly. The slight, crisp, metallic scrape of his weighty microphone being adjusted was sharply and plainly audible in the sudden, oppressive silence of the room. He politely thanked the chairman, and he politely thanked the representative. And then he quietly and deliberately noted that her opening statement was incredibly well delivered. He intentionally emphasized the specific word delivered, allowing it to hang in the thick air. He did not say her comments were factually accurate, nor did he state they were legally sound. He didn't argue it was substantively discussed. Instead, he used the very specific, highly critical terminology of a professional debate coach evaluating a strictly theatrical, deeply superficial performance. It was the vocabulary someone uses when the dramatic execution was excellent, but the actual factual substance was completely missing. He seamlessly acknowledged her pointed comments regarding his Ivy League education, freely confirming that he certainly attended Princeton and Harvard Law School. However, he immediately and precisely dismantled her carefully constructed tale of his supposed generational privilege. He told the absolutely quiet room that his elite education was actually paid for by a deeply poor father who washed incredibly dirty, heavy restaurant dishes to get by. His father, he explained, with total steadfast intensity, had fled the communist regime in Cuba with exactly $100 physically, desperately sewn right into the fabric of his underwear. His dad had suffered through excruciating, physically destroying double and triple shifts in a boiling, grease-covered kitchen. His father slept just 4 hours a night on a hard, unforgiving floor, solely so his little boy could eventually attend a prestigious university he had previously never even known existed. Every single tuition check, Cruz stated, staring directly into her eyes, was practically and literally written with blood-soaked, grease-stained dishwashing money. He declared he had never forgotten that sacrifice, and he promised the committee he never, ever would. Cruz then took his own turn, pivoting directly to the main legislative issue at hand. He openly agreed with the representative that the current system had severe, undeniable flaws, but he fiercely and totally rejected her basic premise that the American Congress needed to write completely new, sweeping regulations. The true fundamental problem, he argued with growing intensity, was a catastrophic, deliberate refusal to actually enforce the strict regulations that already legally existed in the statutes. He paused, allowing the heavy silence to stretch out uncomfortably across the marble room. He announced to the captivated panel that instead of engaging in a theoretical, speculative, and ultimately useless debate about the ideology of dark money, corporate political action committees, and the broad ideas that make for great viral political speeches but completely fail to implement real change, he was going to provide a very specific, undeniable, concrete example. He was ready to show the entire panel and the millions of people watching from home precisely what it truly looks like when a sitting, famous member of the U.S. Congress actively, shamelessly, and regularly violates the existing federal laws. He placed his right hand firmly and heavily on the manila envelope. Looking directly and unwaveringly into Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's eyes, he stated his intent. He was ready to show the panel some records, her own records. He unhurriedly opened the envelope, and the very first document he pulled out was a long, high-quality, color-printed spreadsheet. He held it up for the bank of cameras, explicitly identifying it as her official, legally mandated 2025 federal campaign spending report. It was a matter of total public record, he noted plainly, available to absolutely anyone who wanted to look. But he pointed out that most journalists and political analysts rarely bother to look past the top-level total spending amounts. His investigative team, however, had looked very closely, having painstakingly and meticulously scrutinized every single individual charge. They had broken down the massive file, carefully comparing every single hotel stay billed to her political account against the publicly accessible, highly accurate average nightly room rates of those exact luxury properties. He walked the captive, silent audience through the deeply incriminating, undeniable data, pointing out three highly noticeable columns. Column A legally showed her campaign's total hotel expenses for the 2025 calendar year, while Column B accurately displayed the average nightly cost of those exact luxury destinations pulled directly from their own booking websites. Column C provided the devastating, completely undeniable context. It showed the exact median monthly rent in her own congressional district, New York's 14th district, spanning the Bronx and Queens, which currently stood at roughly $1,850 a month. Cruz began reading the specific, luxurious receipts aloud, his voice steady, uncompromising, and totally devoid of emotion. A lavish room at the Langham Huntington in Pasadena, California, billed at exactly $450 for a single night. The highly exclusive Vdara Hotel and Spa in Las Vegas, Nevada, billed at $380 a night. The beautiful Lansdowne Resort in Virginia, billed at $325 a night. The trendy Arlo Williamsburg, right in Brooklyn, billed at $275 a night. And a staggering, unbelievable stay at the Hotel Palacio Provincial in San Juan, Puerto Rico, totaling exactly $4,000 for the luxury suites alone, which was also accompanied by a completely separate massive charge of $10,743, dedicated strictly and entirely to high-end catering and lavish meals. He intentionally lowered the document and delivered the final, crushing total calculation. In just one calendar year, the representative sitting across from him had blown exactly $53,000 solely on lavish, top-tier boutique accommodation. Crucially, he emphasized, she had funded this opulent, jet-setting lifestyle using campaign donations primarily gathered directly from working-class citizens in her district. She had incinerated significantly more money on high-end hotels in 12 short months than 3 of her own struggling constituents spent on basic, necessary shelter in an entire year combined. Before she could automatically open her mouth to interrupt, before she could use the standard political reflex to justify the huge numbers and claim that extensive travel is a normal, unavoidable requirement of campaigning, Cruz completely cut off her air. He stated that the enormous dollar amount wasn't even the most intriguing part. The truly devastating part was the specific, undeniable. It was a deeply detailed calendar cross-reference, as his research team had diligently and completely compared her luxury hotel check-in and check-out dates against her publicly available, highly promoted campaign event schedule. They had reviewed her official website, her social media accounts, and local news coverage. They discovered an undeniable, horrific pattern of financial abuse, where on 3 distinct, incredibly expensive hotel trips, specifically including the extravagant travels to Pasadena and Las Vegas, there was absolutely zero scheduled campaign event within 48 hours of her arrival or departure. There was zero political fundraising event, zero local town hall, and zero public rally. There was zero public appearance of any kind. It was, he finalized with brutal clarity, simply a lavish, luxury vacation entirely and illegally paid for on her small-dollar donor's dime. He then specifically highlighted the most geographically absurd, legally questionable expense on the entire spreadsheet. He pointed to the expensive stay at the Arlo Williamsburg, a very trendy boutique hotel located in Brooklyn. He reminded her pointedly and deliberately that Brooklyn is located inside New York City. It is the exact city she permanently resides in, the specific metropolis where her congressional district is located. She had purposely used small donor campaign funds to rent a luxury hotel room for $275 a night in the exact same city where she already owned and maintained a private residence. He let the enormous, unjustifiable hypocrisy hang in the air of the silent room. He informed her that there are deeply poor people living right in her district who are forced to sleep 3 to a single cramped bedroom simply because they cannot possibly afford basic rent, while she was purposefully wasting their political contributions on local luxury hotel suites. He confessed, his voice shifting into a tone of genuine, profound disbelief, that he was consciously trying to formulate a logical, legal way to explain that specific expense to a struggling donor, and he simply could not find one. He finished the first set of evidence with brutal, surgical efficiency, painting the incredibly rich picture of a famous politician dominating a highly watched national television circuit supposedly dedicated to fighting the wealthy elite, while she was simultaneously enjoying $4,000 hotel rooms and casually drinking $24 espresso cocktails, all paid for entirely by the exact working-class people she falsely claimed to represent. Without missing a single beat, he seamlessly moved to document number 2. He displayed a crisp copy of an official federal government form, specifically identifying it as a congressional spouse access request legally filed for her longtime fiancé, Riley Roberts. He held the page up high, clearly revealing 2 distinct, brightly highlighted areas. The first highlighted section clearly and legally granted Riley Roberts the official privileged status of a recognized spouse. Cruz carefully and methodically outlined the massive, deeply lucrative value of this specific congressional designation. It immediately granted her fiancé highly restricted, secure, unescorted access to the whole Capitol complex. It legally permitted him to travel internationally on lavish, highly expensive, taxpayer-funded congressional delegations. Furthermore, it explicitly allowed him to legally accept a highly coveted, completely free entry ticket to the incredibly exclusive Met Gala, a luxury item carrying a strict, undeniable market value of $35,000, utilizing a specific ethics loophole strictly and entirely reserved only for legal spouses of elected officials. Then, Cruz purposefully pointed his finger toward the second highlighted section located on the exact same page of the government form. It was a standard, legally mandated checkbox asking if the designated spouse's comprehensive, complete financial information and business holdings were fully included within the representative's mandatory annual financial disclosure report to the public. That incredibly vital box, Cruz noted with absolute ringing clarity, was left totally, intentionally unchecked. He stared directly and sharply at her, explaining the complex legal concept of conscious evasion. He stated that she had purposely and carefully structured her federal legal paperwork to systematically extract every conceivable luxury, benefit, and financial perk associated with a spousal designation, while completely and intentionally dodging all of the ethical transparency, public scrutiny, and strict financial disclosure requirements that legally accompany it. Whenever a spousal title conveniently netted a free $35,000 gala ticket or free international luxury travel, he was her beloved partner. But the very moment it was necessary to legally disclose his lucrative corporate income to the American people, he miraculously transformed into a complete legal stranger. As her jaw tightened and she frantically attempted to stop the onslaught, desperately claiming this was a vicious, inappropriate personal attack against her family, Cruz shut her down instantly and totally. He firmly stated he was absolutely not attacking anyone. He was simply and objectively reading aloud from a public government document containing her own legally binding official signature. He then leaned back and unleashed a devastating, rapid-fire series of financial questions he knew she could not possibly answer. He demanded to know Riley Roberts' actual, complete net worth, and he asked what exact corporate stocks he actively traded. He demanded to know what highly profitable private consulting contracts he currently maintained with massive technology corporations. He aggressively asked if any of those exact unnamed businesses had active lobbying interests, pressure campaigns, or pending regulations before the powerful congressional committees that she personally sat on and led. He answered his own crushing questions. The American public has absolutely zero idea. She had successfully and intentionally hidden his entire financial portfolio for 4 straight, incredibly influential years. Cruz mathematically quantified the exact scale of the grift, noting his team had carefully calculated that her fiancé had amassed exactly $82,000 in tangible, exclusive, luxury benefits, foreign trips, and highly restricted capital access. In return for this massive benefit, the American taxpayers received exactly $0 in financial transparency. He expertly turned her own famous viral political slogan directly against her, noting that she constantly and aggressively accused the wealthy elite of using legal loopholes to avoid accountability. Yet she was currently committing the exact same unethical behavior on federal disclosure forms. The atmosphere in the giant room grew increasingly, overwhelmingly tense. Her highly paid chief of staff, sitting right behind her, was frantically typing on a smartphone, completely consumed by the rapidly spiraling, undeniable political disaster. Cruz then reached into the folder and pulled out document number 3, the most legally perilous, criminally dangerous paper in the entire stack. He showed her official, legally sworn FEC financial records, specifically highlighting 3 massive, separate monetary payments made directly to a Dr. Brian W. Boyle located in Massachusetts. The combined payments totaled exactly $18,725. Every single one of these huge transfers was officially categorized and legally submitted to the U.S. government under penalty of perjury as leadership, training, and consulting. Cruz then produced a high-quality color printout of Dr. Boyle's official, public, professional medical website. He carefully read the doctor's impressive credentials directly into the congressional record, noting the man was a highly respected, board-certified psychiatric specialist. His explicitly advertised, highly specialized clinical focuses included invasive mental health treatments, therapy-resistant severe depression, and incredibly expensive ketamine-assisted therapies. Cruz stated with absolute, undeniable, factual certainty that nowhere on this doctor's entire professional website did he offer any services even remotely related to political campaign consulting, legislative strategy, or executive coaching. The room grew so profoundly quiet it felt physically heavy, as if the air itself had solidified. Cruz then purposely picked up a single sheet of paper. It was a highly confidential, deeply sensitive campaign email, legally obtained by investigators during an ongoing FEC audit process. It was timestamped exactly 1 month before the very first massive payment was officially wired to the psychiatrist. It was a direct recorded conversation between her campaign's chief compliance officer and her top lead staffer. Cruz read the 5 absolutely devastating words aloud, letting them echo in the chamber. The message explicitly asked, "Can we classify as consulting?" He didn't yell, and he didn't raise his voice. He had no need to, because the sheer, overwhelming legal gravity of the private document did all the heavy lifting for him. He methodically outlined the severe, undeniable criminal ramifications of that single documented sentence. Her own campaign's financial managers explicitly acknowledged in the actual body of the message that federal campaign funds absolutely and legally cannot be used to pay for personal medical bills. They fully knew the transaction was totally and undeniably illegal, but instead of stopping the fraudulent payment, they actively conspired in writing to figure out exactly how to falsely mislabel the medical invoice to intentionally hide it from federal regulators. AOC's carefully cultivated impenetrable political armor completely and visibly shattered, and her face completely drained of color. The highly practiced, fiercely confident composure that had made her an unstoppable television sensation evaporated completely into the cold air. She snapped her head back to look desperately at her chief of staff, her wide eyes silently demanding an explanation for how such a catastrophic, legally damning internal document had landed squarely in the hands of Senator Ted Cruz. Her aide completely refused to make eye contact, staring rigidly and helplessly down at her phone. Cruz looked directly at the terrified representative and delivered the final crushing verdict. He told her clearly and unequivocally that he didn't care in the slightest if she sought psychiatric treatment. That was her entirely personal, private business. But what he cared deeply and passionately about was the undeniable fact that she took nearly $20,000 from working-class people who deeply believed in her progressive message, selfishly used their hard-earned money to pay her own private medical bills, and then intentionally and legally lied about it on sworn federal documents. Her highly paid staff knew it was illegal. They literally asked how to hide it, and they successfully hid it. That, he stated with the cold, clinical precision of a former Supreme Court litigator, is absolutely not political hypocrisy. That is federal campaign finance fraud. He deliberately let the heavy, legally disastrous word fraud echo in the silent room, letting it press down heavily on her rapidly imploding political career. Then, methodically, he moved to document number 4, unveiling an incredibly thick, heavily tabbed copy of the official House Ethics Committee report regarding her infamous, highly controversial appearance at the luxury Met Gala. He completely bypassed the superficial main headline about her minor $3,000 fine and dove right into the deeply buried, highly revealing details. He read a specific section where her own staff had explicitly and desperately pleaded with luxury vendors to massively discount their premium rates, specifically telling the contractors that the representative suffered from severely limited financial means. Cruz highlighted the disgusting, unbelievable hypocrisy. Her staff falsely claimed she was essentially broke when it came to paying for her own luxury cosmetics and clothing. Yet in that exact same calendar year, her campaign magically found $53,000 of donor money to blow carelessly on premium luxury hotels. He read further into the devastating report, systematically detailing how her well-funded campaign had completely stiffed the working-class agency that provided her professional hairstyling for the highly exclusive event. The invoice was officially sent in September, and it was completely ignored for 5 agonizing, stressful months. It was only finally paid in late February, literally one day after the panicked, entirely unpaid workers officially threatened to file a formal public ethics complaint against her. He painted the cruel, undeniably hypocritical picture. A wildly famous politician wearing a custom designer dress, demanding higher taxes on the wealthy, had purposely and callously refused to pay the blue-collar workers who styled her for an elite, billionaire-filled party until they legally threatened her livelihood. Finally, Cruz carefully cleared the whole mahogany table of the thick legal files, the federal reports, and the copied incriminating emails. He reached into his manila envelope one last time and pulled out a single, incredibly fragile piece of cheap, lined notebook paper. It was a simple, handwritten letter. As he held it up delicately, his voice changed completely and dramatically. The sharp, probing, highly prosecutorial tone vanished entirely, replaced completely by the grounded, deeply sincere, quiet voice of a man who truly and instinctively understood the fundamental value of a hard-earned dollar. He explained to the silent room that this page was a personal letter he had received from a citizen named Elena Dominguez, a hard-working home health aide who lived directly inside AOC's own congressional district in the struggling Bronx. He described Elena's incredibly difficult life with methodical, deeply respectful detail. She earned exactly $17.50 an hour. Her incredibly physically demanding job consisted of physically lifting frail, elderly people out of hospital beds, cleaning their painful bed sores, and changing their soiled, dirty sheets. She drove an old, unreliable Honda Civic with nearly 200,000 miles on the odometer and was forced to eat her cheap lunch completely alone in concrete parking lots because her stressful work site had absolutely no break room. During the previous election cycle, Elena had carefully chosen to donate exactly $25 to AOC's political campaign. Cruz heavily emphasized what that specific amount of money truly meant to this voter. It was absolutely not extra, disposable income. It was the exact, literal financial equivalent of 2 solid hours of backbreaking, exhausting, depleting physical labor. She willingly gave that hard-earned money only because she truly believed AOC's heavily promoted narrative. She believed the representative genuinely understood the painful struggles of the American working class. Cruz read the heartbreaking, entirely genuine letter aloud, explaining that Elena wrote she had seen the devastating news reports about the $53,000 carelessly wasted on luxury hotels. She expressed her profound, completely justified sense of deep betrayal, noting clearly that her $25 donation to entire exhausting hours of her difficult life had been carelessly and frivolously thrown onto a massive pile of cash used to fund a single $450 night at a luxury resort in Pasadena, a wealthy city she would never ever have the resources to visit. She noted with quiet dignity that a single solitary night in that room cost significantly more than her entire monthly grocery budget for her family. Cruz gently and respectfully set the handwritten note down onto the polished mahogany desk. He looked directly at AOC, who was now visibly fighting back tears, and delivered the ultimate, completely devastating analogy. He reminded her, quietly but firmly, that she constantly bragged that she used to work as a bartender, which meant she implicitly and perfectly understood exactly how a tip jar functions. He noted that regular, hard-working people absolutely do not put their hard-earned money into a tip jar to finance the bartender's luxury, high-end vacations. They put money into the glass jar specifically because they trust the person standing behind the bar to do honest, reliable work. He told her that thousands of struggling, working-class voters, exactly like Elena, had loyally and hopefully put their money into her political tip jar. They had sacrificed actual pieces of their difficult lives for her supposed cause. And she had selfishly, recklessly, and illegally wasted their deep trust on luxury hotels, highly exclusive sushi dinners, $24 cocktails, and deeply personal medical bills that she fraudulently and actively tried to hide from the government. Leaning forward one last time, the silence in the massive room so absolute it was deafening, Cruz delivered the final, inescapable conclusion. He told her plainly that in absolutely any normal, functioning business in the country, dipping your hand into the tip jar to fund your own luxury lifestyle gets you immediately and permanently fired. He methodically gathered the 5 devastating documents, placed them carefully back into the folder, securely snapped his worn leather briefcase, and walked straight out of the enormous room without answering a single shouted question from the frantic, desperate reporters. He absolutely had no need to speak to them. The undeniable, mathematically proven records had already fully spoken for themselves. The resulting political fallout was completely unprecedented in its blinding speed and total, undeniable destruction. By the early afternoon, the highly damaging video clip of Cruz reading the "Can we classify as consulting?" email had organically and massively surpassed 15 million views, completely dominating every single major social media platform. The highly memorable phrase in any bar in America that gets you fired instantly became the undisputed #1 trending topic worldwide, holding that top position for nearly a full, grueling 24 hours. AOC frantically and desperately attempted to regain control of the rapidly collapsing narrative by streaming live on Instagram later that evening. Looking clearly highly distressed and defensive, she passionately condemned the entire hearing as a heavily coordinated, deeply malicious, completely unfair attack against progressive values. She frantically insisted the massive hotel bills were totally standard and that the huge medical payments were perfectly legitimate. However, the internet is fundamentally unforgiving, and her own formerly loyal supporters completely flooded the live comment section, totally ignoring her, crying, and fiercely demanding real, provable answers. They relentlessly and mercilessly asked about the leaked campaign email, and they demanded to know exactly why she stayed in a luxury hotel located in her own home city. They called for a strict accounting of her fiance's entirely hidden corporate income. Her previously unbreakable political coalition fractured instantly, divided fiercely and permanently between those who desperately and blindly wanted to believe her emotional rhetoric and those who simply could not ignore the concrete, verifiable, undeniable evidence. Within just 48 hours, the powerful Federal Election Commission officially upgraded the initial complaint into a full, highly serious, formal federal investigation, specifically citing the leaked campaign email as highly credible, actionable evidence of deliberate, criminal intent to commit massive campaign finance fraud. At the same time, the Office of Congressional Ethics launched a comprehensive, highly probing investigation into Riley Roberts' completely undisclosed corporate consulting contracts, which investigative journalists quickly and shockingly estimated to be worth well over $300,000 in totally hidden income. Her previously incredibly loyal campaign organization began to completely fall apart. Her head compliance officer suddenly and unexpectedly resigned, intentionally releasing a damaging statement to the press, explicitly stating they could no longer safely operate due to the intense legal scrutiny surrounding prior internal communications, a blindingly clear signal to the political world that even more highly incriminating messages existed. A formidable, truly authentic working-class primary challenger named Carmen Reyes immediately announced her energetic campaign in the Bronx, raising massive campaign funds entirely from deeply disillusioned local voters in a matter of a few short days. Progressive Party leadership, absolutely terrified by the incredibly toxic, damaging optics, very quietly stripped AOC of her highly influential seat on the Financial Services Committee, far away from the chaotic, panicked crisis management centers of D.C. Back in a cramped, cracked concrete parking lot in the Bronx, Elena Dominguez sat quietly inside her old, undependable car. She was watching the highly viral clips of the devastating hearing on her cracked cell phone screen during a brief, incredibly precious 15-minute break between her physically exhausting clients. She watched the powerful Texas senator read her deeply personal, handwritten words aloud to the whole world. She saw the panicked, totally trapped, defeated expression on the face of the politician she had formerly deeply and truly trusted. Elena did not feel a sudden, triumphant rush of vindication or intense, burning anger. She simply felt the deep, incredibly heavy, bone-deep exhaustion of a person who works constantly and endlessly just to survive another 24 hours. She slowly checked her simple banking app, carefully looking at her exact, meager, hard-earned balance. Every single dollar was completely accounted for, honestly earned through heavy sweat and intense physical strain. She closed the app, put away her cheap phone, and walked into the next crumbling apartment building to carefully and gently help another frail, elderly person into a plastic shower chair. That was the unglamorous, totally concrete reality of the working class. There were absolutely zero luxury hotel rooms, zero hugely expensive cocktails, and zero overpriced consultants. There was only the quiet, incredibly unseen, dignified work of keeping vulnerable people alive. At that precise same moment, down in the warm climate of Houston, Texas, Rafael Cruz sat completely silently inside his comfortable, solid living room, watching his famous son on the television. As Ted passionately described his father washing thick, greasy dishes for 50 cents an hour, Rafael slowly closed his aged eyes and vividly, perfectly remembered the searing, painful hot water and the thick, heavy grease that never fully washed off his exhausted hands. He remembered the exact, terrifying feeling of the $100 safely sewn into his simple underwear when he first arrived in the vastness of America. He opened his eyes and looked at the glowing screen as he implicitly and deeply understood the fundamental, massive difference between honestly earning your own money through hard, grueling work versus selfishly and immorally taking it from others. The wealthy representative had intentionally taken $25 from an exhausted, tired woman who physically cleans painful backs to survive, and she selfishly and illegally blew it completely on herself. And his son, the exact same boy who had grown up in that small, tight Austin house, watching him count pennies, had just expertly and completely exposed the entire massive fraud to the whole world using nothing but undeniable, cold, hard facts. Rafael smiled a deeply satisfied, small, quiet smile, knowing the political tip jar was finally and completely empty, and the whole world now knew exactly who stole the money.